All right, welcome back to the podcast. Usually here's where Michael says attack for 20, but we have a new co-host, Pheano Black.
Attack for 20.
We're going to recap U.S. Nationals, and we have also joining with us a special guest making the finals, Dan.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So one of the first things that I kind of wanted to do is just do a quick recap of your event, Dan, why you chose to play Phi, as well as how the drafting portion was for you.
Yeah, for sure. It was quite the weekend. It's definitely a good one. I'll start with the Phi question, I guess. That really goes back to PT Lil. Why did I play Phi? I didn't enjoy the Rune Blades very much. Too many hands that didn't attack well. And I had a week before the event to lock in on something. So Phi seemed like the obvious choice there because it's very consistent and seemed to already match the damage. So our Yuanji's and I teammate, Shane, had a pretty spicy build for Phi that he gave me to start testing. And immediately I was like, well, this is great. That was like a combo Phi where we had a bunch of like toolkit options to use off of the pouncing links. So I played that for a week. We kind of just optimized it to make our hard matchups a little bit better. So that's why I locked it in for the last event. After that event, I moved into a house the first time owning a home. So I knew my time was pretty limited. So I was like, I don't know, 95% locked on Phi for Nats as well. Unless some like jarring issues with the deck came up, like if we couldn't beat Oldhim or something like that. That proved to not be the case. We worked pretty hard on changing the build to attack the expected meta, which was Oldhim, Icelander, and the 3 aggro decks, the Toon Rune Blades, and Phi. And we got it to a pretty, I'd say even very favored spot against all the aggro decks. It pretty much felt like they had to high roll us or we would win. Icelander felt that way as well. And then Oldhim was very close. It felt like it got to the point where neither of the heroes wanted to be facing the other. And I think that's good enough.
It seemed like the prevailing wisdom was that, the ice decks were good into aggro. What made it so that way your game plan into these ice decks was actually kind of flipping that matchup where you're happy bringing this into potential ice meta?
Yeah, for sure. So our big thing, I think, that I loved about the deck is we really focused on flexibility with our attacks. So like we got it to a spot where regardless of what disruption was thrown, most of the time we had an efficient play still. So things like a lot of 3 blocks, a couple extra blues and energy potions for those ice decks. The biggest one by far was Enlightened Strike. Like regardless of what the disruptive deck presents, E-Strike presents a good enough play. It's not always the craziest, but E-Strike for 7's amazing. If you have to block 6 to stop like a Spinal or something. Or you can even block 5, right? Because Spinal doesn't matter at that point. Even against, say, Icelander, like you can AB3, take the Frostbite that they're presenting, and then just pitch a card and still E-Strike for 7. Stuff like that. Just having very flexible hands that still present damage, regardless of what's going on.
So you're like basically able to play the game to some capacity no matter what.
Correct.
And are you like waiting to just have this like one big explosive round where like shields are down, they didn't like strip your hand on a round or something like that?
Yeah, I'd say we're hoping to. Like the game plan is very much to just chip and out value. Like we have very efficient 2 and 3 card hands. Like the classic 3 card 7, 5 hands very good. We can do 3 card 13 if we have, or 2 card 7 rather, 3 card 13 with Lava Burst. The E-Strike adds an additional 3 card 13 line because we can go starter weapon, or 12 rather. You can go starter weapon, pick up a flame, and then E-Strike for 7, which is pretty good. No, it's 13.
So just very efficient.
Yes, exactly.
I think the main strength of the deck at the time was a lot of the kind of disruptive decks, I would say, were trying to shut off like a particular line of play. So like against like Briar, like the Oldhim wants to like choke slam on their CMH turn, or like against Phi, it's like, okay, well, if I attack you with choke slam or like crush the weak, or if I attack you with spinal crush and you can't, like, I get to take your turn, but just like avoid trying to like have it so that some of your hands just like line up. Their hit trigger doesn't do anything or very little, kind of nets you like the win in like the value game.
Do you
Yeah,
not feel
exactly.
like you're maybe playing like a almost like a fairer version of Phi compared to a normal Phi, since you're playing all these just like efficient lines instead of high spike damage bursty, high rolly things?
I think from a certain perspective, that's fair. But I think it also could feel even more unfair because we block so well and we like actively want to.
Hmm.
So we're like usually Phis don't handle hit triggers very well, like Briar with all the snatch effects, or Viscerai with the mouse guys, where our entire game plan is just to block all of those every time.
So your game plan in the aggro mirrors was actually to trade cards, not just let's just see whose 5 card hands line up better.
Exactly, because we knew ours was more efficient most of the time. Obviously, if they high roll, that's always the catch. Um, but yes, and any draw effects or any like plus damage effects, the game plan was almost always to block it.
Just
Obviously, if you
whatever
got a hand that,
mathematically is like the most value in either direction, attacking or blocking, kind of.
for the most part, yeah. Like it's hard to value draw effects a little bit, but
Hmm.
those are like 100%. You just block them, and
Mhm.
the furnace really helps with that. That lets you block 2 of them. You get to go furnace plus Chuko for 1, and then furnace plus a 3 block for the next, because they're always 4s.
I wanted to add that most of the Icelander decks that we thought were around were built in a way that was like a little bit different from what Michael Hamilton brought to the
Mhm.
table. So like against those Icelander decks, they're actually playing like a kind of exploitable strategy where their like average damage output is quite low. So I know that a
Mhm.
lot of other Phi decks weren't playing like AB3. And against like the higher arcane damage builds, like because their total throughput is lower, you can really like I think the biggest like misconception was that Phi's like the beatdown because he's like the aggro deck, but actually like the Icelander is kind of like the beatdown because the Icelander has to avoid getting like outvalued every single turn.
Did your game plan with the deck change at all when you did see physical Icelander? Did you see any other physical Icelanders other than Michael?
Michael was the only one I saw. When we played in Swiss, I did pivot slightly. I changed the Novarune Hood to be Mask of Momentum.
And what was your in Swiss? Did you win or lose that?
So I won that one. Like slight asterisk. It was round 7 of day 1. We were both pretty exhausted. It was an optimal play on both sides. I'll say that.
Wouldn't know what that's like.
Yeah, it was very close. What's right is needs to be tested. I would probably lean towards the mask again if I could replay the final, but as long as you stick to the game plan and like execute on it, I think either one is reasonable.
I think there is one thing that is kind of notable. From what I heard, Michael Hamilton didn't even like really spend a ton of time testing
Mhm.
before nationals. So the list that he ended up winning with is somewhat unoptimized. And so like one of the additions that you could bring to the table is like for example, you could play Kraken Aether Vein, and then that like really polarizes the matchup in a way that like wasn't
I
really
love that card
seen.
in that style. Oh, give me
Yeah,
a card.
we chatted about the deck list for a bit while we were waiting for the other like top 8 matches to play. And I agree with him. I think the best Icelander is like some version of what he's doing. Like you're saying, other decks can just outvalue with the low damage that the more traditional builds do without the like 3 for 8s and E-strikes. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm sure we'll see a much more optimal builds in Worlds because that deck seems like it could be very real. Obviously, it's real because it won, but
Do you guys think that the deck is the physical Icelander list is any worse now that people are kind of aware that it's a thing? Because one thing that
Mhm.
was always on my mind when because I was considering a list similar to that. I was working on that like a little bit on the side with Cody, and my concern with that list originally was just does this get worse after scouting where like a lot of the list its power could come from surprise factor potentially where your opponent's like oh no I didn't know that you're going to start punching me in the mouth, um, where if they know you're going to do that maybe they play different or board different, like oh I know you're playing all these attacks so potentially I do something like for example bring in sinks. I don't know if that's correct, just like a for example something like
Mhm.
that. does Does that style get worse now that the cat's out of the bag, or after scouting? What do you guys think?
I think scouting, not so much, but after practicing against it, like actually knowing your optimal setups, it definitely gets way worse. But like, cause like Icelander presents so many mixed like things you have to deal with. Like it's arcane, it's big, attacks for 8 now, and it's disrupting you and taxing you and taking cards. So
Mhm.
like without practicing into it, it's hard to like theory craft the optimal strategy. Um, so like obviously everyone by the top knew what kind of build he was playing, so it was difficult to get that one right. But I think after people take the time to test against it, and people definitely will, it certainly gets worse.
I will say that one thing. So anybody who talks to me knows sometimes I say like, "Oh, this deck's not real," or "That deck's not real," or
Mhm.
"It is real." So to me, like a deck that isn't real is a deck that once you kind of figure out the right strategy to play against it, you can beat it almost every time.
Mhm.
Whereas decks that are real present questions that are difficult to answer, and sometimes you have to draw the right cards and your stuff has to line up correctly. So even if you know exactly how it is that you can beat them, you don't always beat them.
Mhm.
And I think that the value generated by the cards that you're choosing to play in Icelander, if you choose to run the attacks, uh, place the deck more under like the real category because you can't really outthink big numbers. You just have to
Mhm.
deal with them, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Exactly like I was saying, it does all these mixed things that you have to like deal with and answer correctly. I definitely think it's real. Just gets a little easier once you know like what's optimal to play into it. But I think that's like our 5 list. It's kind of the same thing where we're like we got deck lists in top 8, and I think for our list like we don't really care if you have our list when we're playing against you because like Icelander, it's presenting like 3 different relevant hit effects most turns. So it's not like you can be like waiting for the right one. Like we start the first chain link when we can with like mounting anger, right? And then immediately it's like, well, if you commit 2 cards there, now my mask momentum's easy. I think it's similar in that way.
You wanted to talk about the differences between the U.S. Nationals meta and kind of the whole world, or not the whole world, but a lot of the other large nationals. So kind of just to paint the picture, I feel like the U.S. Nationals meta, most notably, the predominant deck was Phi, which was not the case at any of the other nationals, and it could be because of the recent success of the UK Nationals Phi list. However, I do know that a lot of the better performing Phi decks at the Nationals, not even from people who were working with us or submitting Ember Blade. It seems like there were fewer Rune Blades.
You were saying that you found Runeblade to be favorable on Phi, correct?
Yeah, we did for sure.
So, like, what are you trying to face there? You're as the Runeblade. What's your positive matchup?
Let's talk a little bit about why, like, what Runeblade's strengths were before, and then maybe like why it's kind of fell out of favor by U.S. Nationals. I actually think that Runeblade still has a spot, and I have some ideas, but I would love to hear what you guys think first.
I'm not much of a Runeblade aficionado. Kind of similar to what you were saying earlier, Dan, of some of the issues you had with the class. I really had issues with the class. I not a very lucky person, so the whole like, yeah, you got to draw attacks and non-attack style usually doesn't agree with me. I'm very bad at landing 50-50s.
Yep.
So I've never enjoyed playing that class. But I don't know. It seems like there could be something there. Like Fire does have the ability to just roll over control decks with its like high roll ability. It seems like both of them have game into control.
I think the two Rune Blades are pretty different. I haven't played them a ton, just a little bit, but Versatile I think can do similar to Fi, where it offers very consistent 3 card hands with their Mob Skies, big attack, Rosetta Thornline, which is usually what 11 to 13 plus damage. And Briar offers like the ability to just spike games. Like if you get to creep your Force of Nature, draw some cards, combo with Mount Heroic, like you just win. If they can't stop your draw effects and you just get to pop off. Yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts, Yuanji?
I think it mostly has to do with how a lot of the Guardians are kind of preparing their choice of cards that they're playing.
Mhm.
So if Briar is getting targeted Briar's getting targeted with cards like Chokeslam and I think a lot of Oldhams are playing stuff like Winter's Bite and Hypothermia to kind of like shut off their like bigger turns. And on like similarly, Hypothermia is also like really good out of Icelander to like fight against like Viserai. But Hypothermia as a card doesn't really affect Phi as much because so many of his attacks have natural go again. So I think it has to do with kind of like the card choices that a lot of the control players were making. And so, like you said, like the Runeblades are kind of different decks, but I think they do share a common weakness, which is most of their attacks don't have go again, and then part of their strength is giving their attack go again and then being able to attack with weapon. And so there's like a lot of ways to attack that, which I don't think the control decks were like fully trying to attack Phi in the same way.
Your Finalist was trying to do the thing where you're like, no, it's fine. I'll block with some cards and then still have a round. It could be that the Runeblades are having a much harder time having a game plan like that, and maybe we could see that strategy implemented into the Runeblades where they have more efficient 2-card hands, because it seems like a lot of what they're trying to do at a minimum needs 3, and they really want more than that to like. It's like, why am I playing this deck? Well, I'm playing this deck so I have this like crazy 4 or 5 card hand, and if I can't do that, then why am I even playing this deck sometimes?
I think the other angle that Phi has that the Runeblades are missing is that as soon as the disruptive decks like miss a disruption turn, Phi's like 90% to have a turn that says you need to do some blocking here.
They just have a hand of like nothing as the Runeblade, where they're like, yep, these pieces don't really line up to you have to block. It's just a number on a card.
Yeah. Whereas Phi, if there's no disruption, you're getting to at least Chain Link 5.
Yeah, I think Runeblades usually do best when there's like a light amount of disruption available because like the 5-card Runeblade hands are just like so powerful.
Yep.
But a lot of the decks right now are kind of geared towards stopping you from playing 5 cards. I think Viserai's 2-card hands are usually atrocious. I was actually playing E-Strikes in my Visit list in the Battle Hardened in Singapore before I was like deciding what to play Allele for that reason. I don't know. It's just like it's like adding consistency into your deck. I think that's like a little bit lacking. I think Viserai, you're like too incentivized to play Runeblade attacks. And Briar, you're like also like a little bit too incentivized to play all these like small attacks that just like help you like chain off during like your Channel heroic turns.
I thought what was really interesting, at least for me, on Talishar, it kind of like fully advertised the expected meta. Like it played out as it happened on there. Like 3 weeks before the event, I played Oldham at least half the time. And then starting maybe 2 weeks before, it was like nothing but Phi. Just Phi, 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 Phi. I was like, okay, I guess everybody's on Phi now. But it was mostly Emberblade, I think, at that time. And then like, and the Oldhams were playing Stalagmite. And then a week before the event, all the Oldhams were suddenly on Rampart and all the Phis are suddenly on Kodachis. And I think that's what the majority of the ones at the event I saw.
I wonder if maybe that could be a time zone thing too, because I was playing at weird times a lot of the time, and I was still queuing into mostly Oldhim all the way up until like a few days before the event when I stopped playing.
Okay. Interesting.
That's a weird thought. I'll look into that some more later.
Yeah.
Ask my opponents where they're from.
Yeah.
Who are you?
U.S. Nationals was a mixed format tournament, so we had 6 rounds of draft in addition to 8 rounds of CC and Swiss. How did you find the drafting portion? Also, did you listen to our podcast beforehand?
Not the most recent one, but yes, I've listened to every other episode and I enjoy them a lot. I also live like 20 minutes from you guys and play draft with you all the time, so we share some similar knowledge there. Yeah, no, draft was super interesting. It's always a little stressful in this format. Like everyone's shooting for 2-1, which is not normal, right? Like usually the top players are like, I have to 3-0 draft.
Did I always try to draft a 3-0?
Yeah, there you go. Me too. Yeah, I think I was very like happy and proud with how I navigated my drafts. The first one was pretty interesting. I got I'd call it a lucky pack one because it was like easy signal sending. I had a pack that had like 3 extremely good Icelander cards. like red, Aether Ice Vein, and a good blue, and I think like a red, whatever the 1 for 4 is called. I forget the name right now. And then every Draconic card was just terrible, like really bad. And there was a Sash. So it's like, this is the easiest Sash of my life. 2 people somewhere are going to see this pack and go Icelander, because there's like 3 commons that were good. And no one's going to early commit off of this pack to anything Draconic. So it's like easy Sash, we'll play Dromai or Fi. Then I started leaning Dromai because I got like a pick 3 Aswellai, which isn't the craziest, but like 0-cost dragons are pretty good, and it's like super premium in the mirror, I think.
And getting past that's a pretty good indicator that the person to your right isn't valuing it.
Exactly. So I leaned that way. I got some packs where it felt like I lost confidence that Dromai was the way, maybe like pick 5 or 6. So I took a yellow starter just in case, just to kind of hedge. I didn't really like sacrifice too much for it. And then I forget what the next pick was, but it was very clear that, okay, Phi's open. We're going to go that way. So I pretty much went Phi the rest of the way. I had a pretty good deck from what I remember, like good enough that I felt very confident getting a 2-1 with the chance of 3-0ing. I don't remember it super well, but I believe I don't know what decks I played against actually. I believe I won the dice roll the first 2 games and went second, and it just played out how it plays out as Phi. I did like 10 damage, set a card. Or rather, I went second. Yeah, 10 damage, set a card, and then make them start blocking on my second turn and just never
What was
stop.
your draft record? For the first one?
3-0 for both. Yeah, I don't remember the first one super well. The second one, so it was after going 7-0 day 1, playing Phi every round. So I went into it kind of thinking like, these guys might think I have a bias towards Phi and that I might force it. So I thought it was in my favor to not force Phi, but to heavily signal that I'm in Phi and to lean that way if I can. And that kind of just worked out. Pack 1, it was like extremely clear that there was 2 Phis at maximum, which is pretty crazy. So for pack 2, I got extremely greedy. I like prioritized equipment over everything. I think I first picked Sash and then second pick Heatwave. Is Heatwave the right card?
I feel
For
like
gloves?
that's just correct.
See, that's weird.
That's
I
not
go
the
the other
greedy part.
direction. I go the other direction on the equipment, but I'm still in the mindset where I don't really value equipment as highly because it doesn't like send the signal necessarily. Because like if I take that out of the pack, I'm not telling the person to my left what I am. Sometimes it can, but like
Well, this is pack 2 though.
Yeah.
oh, pack 2 then
Yeah,
sure.
I'm saying pack 1,
In.
Phi was extremely open. There's 2 of us maximum.
I feel like it's correct for Phi to pick the equipments early. I think
yeah.
the dynamics are a little bit different depending on how many people you're trying to contest.
Yes. But I was like, I know I'm gonna get all the starters and stuff I need. I just want this free like +4 damage minimum.
Mhm.
So I did that, and then I took all of my like Draconics and generics before taking any ninja cards. Like I took like back-to-back lava bursts and all that good stuff. I'm like, I'll get starters later. I only had like 3 at the time.
Oh, so good.
And it actually pushed one of the Dromais, I guess, into Phi when I did that. But like it was super late, and I don't know if he was on my left. I think he was close to one of the other Phis. So then pack 3, I took like nothing but starters, and I knew it was more open that direction, right? Because of pack 1. So I was just like, I'm just gonna take every starter, finish the deck, and it was great. And then I actually paired into that Phi who moved late the first round, and he even said like his deck was a little low power as a result. But that draft went the same, where I think I went first round was a Phi mirror. I won the dice roll. I got to go second. Yeah, I think I ended that game with a lava burst into tide flippers, lava burst or something like that.
The old 2-card
Then-
10.
Yep, to end the chain. I think the next game was against an Icelander. Man, I really don't remember. I threw out that draft too. I know that. The last round was against a Dromai who had like 9 or 10 rakes or something. They were just like, I'm not losing to Icelander ever. But they didn't have a great game plan into Phi, admittedly.
Mhm.
So yeah, draft went very well for me. Second one, the drafting experience itself was a bit easier because what I was hoping would happen happened. But I think I had a good game plan going into it.
I wanted to ask, how do you feel about Worlds being Uprising draft? It's like it's like another like big tournament with like basically the
Yep.
same format.
Ugh.
I'd say mixed feelings. It feels like a missed opportunity. Like I think it would have been cool with all the like adding blitz in there to do 2 different draft formats at Worlds. Maybe that's too much to practice for.
Ooh.
Which is my other, I guess my positive feeling is that we can all practice blitz now and figure that format out because we've been drafting this set at a high level for so long.
I would have been down for just WTR draft.
That'd be fine too. I don't know. I'm like torn on this set. I enjoy drafting this set. I think the games are extremely interesting and fun when they are, and extremely not when they're not. And Fi gets to go second and just has 10 damage into 20 damage, and there's nothing you can do.
I just feel like it's very punish. Like this format is very punishing. I feel like most of my games that I do have an advantage, it's like very thin. Like I have like a win, but I'm winning by like 1 or 2 points.
I don't
Yeah,
like
I found that a lot too.
how much is decided on the play draw of the format. That really irritates me.
I think that's only true if you just like force Fi a lot. I actually think the other 2 heroes have like quite a bit of play either way.
Yeah, I think they're both fine. I think if you're Fi and you go first against the Fi, it's like you have to have breaking point on your second turn or you just lose, is where I'm at.
Well, you have to like push a lot of damage on the first turn.
Going,
Like
no, I'm
if
saying
you,
going first.
yeah, like if you go first, I think if you push a lot of damage on the
Oh,
first
yes,
turn,
yes, yes. That is definitely another line
and you
for
like
sure.
and you get to open up like 5 or 6 points on their like hand that doesn't block very well.
Yeah, that was by far my favorite part of our CC Fi list is going first and seeing how high I can get that number of leak damage.
All right, now to cap off the nationals discussion. Like how do you feel? How do you guys feel about CC as we're moving forward into like a couple battle hardens, a ban suspend update, as well as Worlds upcoming in about a little bit over a month?
So let's start with just thoughts on the meta in general, I guess, going forward.
I'd like to see the meta be allowed to naturally develop. Like we saw this very spicy Icelander deck win the event, so we have no idea where that even fits in the meta. Like I don't think anyone at that event had an optimal strategy against it. We had what Oldham's getting hard countered by this insane control dash that heals 6 every turn. Our Finalist, which people have practice into now. I don't know. I feel like the meta was very healthy at our nationals, and there's a bunch of new stuff that came out of it. I think the meta's in a good spot.
I'd agree it's a healthy meta. My thing isn't so much the health of it, it's the fun of it, and I'm personally not having fun with the meta right now, but that might just be because I haven't found a deck that I'm enjoying at the moment. I don't really like any of the hero choices at the moment. That's just personally something that's important for me as a player, and my enjoyment with the game. But I think this is one of the healthiest metas I've played in a card game in a long time. It feels like a lot of different strategies are viable. It feels like a lot of heroes are viable. It feels like there's a lot of counterplay within them and then counterplay to the counterplay. So it's just this continual growth, like you're saying, just the meta developing naturally. And it's really fun watching that, seeing the puzzle kind of solve itself over time. Doesn't feel like there's any degen deck right now.
I think the only thing is that I really wish Worlds had Dynasty kind of thrown into the mix somehow. I think the biggest thing that's missing to, I think, level out the playing field for a lot of decks is that they're just like missing cards. And then the best decks right now are just like decks that aren't missing cards. I think to your point, Pheano, I feel like I think you played Dromai at Nationals as well as the Calling. I had given that deck like a little bit of a try, but I felt like that deck is just like 2 or 3 cards short of being like a complete deck idea. It's like
Yeah,
some of the cards just like don't work together. I felt the
or the
same
deck
way.
just falls apart on its own.
Yeah, and I kind of felt the same way about Viserai at first before like Everfest came out. You do like this one thing, but then you're also playing like a bunch of like cards that don't really like work with your game plan. So
Yeah, like I had 2 rounds where I opened the game with I can't take a game action pass. Like that is cursed.
Yep.
One of the games I lost in the Calling, the top 10 cards in my deck didn't let me take a game action. What the hell?
You should try Phi, man. It's nothing but game options.
And it was extra cursed because it was against Oldhim, and the top 10 cards were all things I needed for my pitch stack to finish the game out, like burn the
Yep.
malls and stuff. And I was like, I'm not allowed to block with these. I can't play these. I can't do anything. Guess I'll just die.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how I felt as well when I was like testing it. One thing that I really hope that LSS does in the future, and maybe they'll do this with Living Legend format. I always felt like the rate that heroes were Living Legend was like a little bit too fast. And although like if Starvo or Chain were still around, obviously they would still kind of be dominant. But I would like to see the game after like a bunch more sets come out to kind of see like what all these heroes, like whether or not like if there's like a level playing field after heroes get more support.
Yeah, were they just broken because limited options type of situation?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm personally mostly curious to see what the game looks like after we start getting the new replacement heroes, because we've been hearing about that for like a year now. That's like this is the plan for Living Legend, and now we've got these Living Legend heroes. Okay, where's my replacements?
You just
I
want the
need
new Prism. You just want the new Prism.
Yes, Prism 2, Boogaloo. I need my waifu back.
Yeah, it's like I feel like the supplemental sets can always be like the craziest game-changing power spikes, or it could be like Everfest to a degree where it was just like all the best decks, get all the best cards in the set, and they're still the best decks.
Yeah, if you're Brew, you get Rolling Thunder.
Yeah, I mean they got the 2 for 8, right?
Yeah.
But that's one card.
Yeah, that's true. How do you feel about playing Fi moving into Worlds?
Spoiling his deck already? That's rude.
No, I was just saying like how he feel, like whether or not he even wants to.
Right. I mean, I think I commented on before, like, I think the way our build is, I guess knowing the defensive game plan, the like Rune Blades and stuff could adjust. But in terms of like the offensive plan of our deck, I don't think people knowing the deck, practicing against the deck matters too much. Because again, we're presenting multiple questions to our opponent
Right.
every combat chain. Like if I had to lock in a deck today, I would have no issue locking in our exact Phi list.
I just don't want to deal with endless winners, to be honest.
Yeah, sometimes they don't matter. Sometimes they're like, oh, that's real bad.
Yeah, the worst is when you have to block them.
Yep. It's basically just like you're passing.
Usually all of our episodes, I try to like sneak in one little educational thing, I think, for the people who are listening. And I think this is something that I think has like a little bit of application to our Phi deck as well as like playing into Oldhim. So I wanted to, maybe you guys already know about this concept. I want to talk about the concept of like implied value of cards versus like the actual like what they're presenting at face value. So for example, a card like Snatch has a face value of 4 damage, but it has like an implied value if you don't block it. And when you and then depending on like what deck you are, when you block it, you are also exchanging value. I think that implied value is like really important when you're it's usually something that's a little bit more important for deck construction than it is for limited. Most of the time in limited, I feel like the most of the cards, just like the numbers are what they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was gonna say in my second draft, I had 2 red engulfing flame waves, and those have a bit of implied value.
Yeah, definitely. I think when it comes to, especially like when we were prepping for the Oldhim Phi mirror, I think a big part of it is about reducing the amount of implied value that Oldhim gets on his attacks. Because I kind of thought, and maybe Dan, you felt the same way, that the matchup is kind of like a big like value fest. Like who can like grind the more numbers out. Basically, like on the Oldhim side, they're just trying to get you to block with as many cards as possible to reduce your total like value or like efficiency.
I was gonna say in regards to Oldhim, we cared so much about mitigating that you cut Art of War from the deck and Belittle. Because those don't work off of 4-card hands and like the choke slam effects. And we just went all in on the you get no value from your hit effects. They're just gonna hit. And it was decently effective, but I don't know. Why did you switch off of that game plan?
Yeah, so this is like in the early brewing stages. I tried like a pure mid-range fi list where it was like a lot more 3 blocks, very few cards that let you really go over the top, but also you just like never get ganked for blocking. And I think the reason why I moved off of it was because I found the aggro matchups to actually be quite difficult. Because you
That's
kind
kind of
of,
what I was trying to say earlier about like the it being like a fair version of Phi.
Yep.
Because like if you're the fair version, well the more aggressive version's probably favored in that kind of mirror.
And
But
that's
it
what I
sounds
think it
like
was at that point. But
yeah, you guys found a way to play the matchup with the blocking to compensate for that.
mhm.
yeah,
I,
and then without belittle and Art of War, it's very difficult. If they have at all good turns, they
mhm.
just like kind of let you get a mass trigger every now and then they just like pile on the value, and you don't have like a recourse to that.
Going back to implied value, though, I think that's part of why Fi is so good, right? Like Mask of Momentum is just every attack has 1/3 of implied value on it, and you have to
Yeah,
just plan accordingly, which is hard.
yeah, and then one of the things that I wanted to say for like the listeners to make it like a little bit more uh like grounded in numbers is that like basically like implied value is if I'm Oldhim and I attack you with a Spinal Crush, every card that you block that blocks for 2 instead of blocking for 3, I'm already going like kind of +1 on that because the base value of a card is like around 3. Uh, but then also if like for the Fi hands, like Dan kind of gave off the numbers, but usually it's like a 2-card hand does 7 against Oldhim. A 2-card hand trades for like a card and does 3 usually, and a 3-card hand usually trades for a card and does 7. Like the 4-card hand is kind of where you can like really push the damage above. So your like 4th card is worth like 4 or 5 points of damage. Like usually for these aggro decks, the each like additional card scales like a little bit better than the previous one. If you are Oldhim and you attack with a Spinal Crush and you get the Fi to block 2 cards, you're also kind of shutting off like between 8 to 9 or even more than 9 points of damage by having them block 2 cards.
I think I know expected value or whatever you're calling it by not by this name, but would you say it's basically like the reasonable expectation of the impact of a card on the game or the game state essentially?
Yeah, it's like
Like I
uh
played a spinal, I'm expecting that you're not going to have a big round now. Like that is the implication of this card.
right. But as a way for people who are listening to give like a more concrete like understanding of, well, what is the actual like numerical way that it
Mhm.
affects the game. So for example, in the situation that Dan suggested, like if you throw a Spinal and then the 5 blocks 2 cards, blocks for 5, and it throws an E-strike for 7, then essentially they had a 12-point total damage round where they got to block 5 points of damage and threaten 7.
Mhm.
So compared to like an average hand, like 4-card hand, maybe that 4-card hand should have done like around 15. So you got like +3 on that one, and that's like with like a hand that mitigates the Spinal pretty well.
Mm.
Mhm.
That makes sense. I usually come from this kind of concept in more of a terms of like tempo than math, but that's also me being the illusionist player that I am, where the math is
Oh my
wonky
god.
on all my stuff.
Prism
Yeah,
math. I still don't know how to do Prism math. Like what is this aura actually worth?
I
Prism players are
I
English
couldn't,
students.
I couldn't even explain the math behind the stuff. I just
Yep.
understand the tempo of it.
Yep. For like aggro decks though, I think that's one of the easiest early level ups is just assigning or understanding a numerical value to all of your cards and blocks and decisions and like making value based decisions instead of like feeling, if that makes sense. Like the
So
game is very mathematical at its base, especially when you're playing aggro.
A funny card for that concept too is a race face, where it's like could have value. Maybe.
Yeah. Oh,
Yep.
It's
let's talk about that
either you don't
example.
get around,
Yep.
or just take 6.
But yeah, well, let's talk about that example. So, for example, let's say you hit a Phi with an erase face, right? Unless they have cards that specifically care about draconic chain links to have go again, other than the Ember Blade, usually you're turning off some amount of damage. But if they can sequence their turn so that they end with Ember Blade, and then essentially you shut off their Phoenix Flame.
Which is one
So
or two.
yeah, so you're affecting the math by like 1 or 2 usually, at
Which is
least.
reasonable. Like 2 cards 7 or 8 is fine. It's just not
Exciting.
Yeah.
what you want to be doing against a deck that's like here's 20 every turn.
Yeah, versus you throw an erase face and it hits against the Viserai.
Mhm.
Their Mauvrion Skies has no text, and neither does their hero power. So if their hand was like Mauvrion Skies, Shrill, a blue, and some other card that they were okay blocking with, they can't their best like line at that point is to create a rune chain with their grasp and like throw the Shrill. So you've basically turned their like 14-point hand, where it's like a 3-point block plus threatening like a Shrill with like an implied value plus their weapon for 11 face damage plus however much like damage you're gonna lose from blocking. And instead converting it into like either they throw like a 3-card like 8, or they just like block and an arsenal card. So in that case, like numerically, the erase face works out a lot better, which kind of like should be what people are considering when they're deciding, okay, like, do I play Choke Slam? Do I play Erase Face? Do I play Command and Conquer? Like all these cards that have disruptive effects, have their disruptive effects due to the implied value that the card generates.
I think a good thing to think about after that, not to go into in this particular podcast, would just be, and then does that matter in this particular matchup? Like, is
Yeah.
that what this is even about? Like, cool. Like, example, the erase face thing. I got you for an extra 2 points of damage because you had to sequence weird, or you didn't get to play your Phoenix Flame. Does that even matter? Is that what this game is even about? Whereas an erase face versus a dash, that could be an interesting one where it's like, yeah, I made them block with 2 cards because this turns off their whole deck. Does that matter? Were they perfectly happy blocking with 2 cards anyways, because that meant that your round was just pushing a race face? It's like figuring out the real nuances of what matters in a particular matchup, and that's an interesting thing that I like to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know if you want to include this into the cast because it's going long, but do you want to do any like funny stories or anything from nationals? Like, do you want to tell people about the bad beats of the battle hardened? That's a funny story.
Oh, bad beat. Oh, okay. Yeah, we can include this. So I don't actually consider this a bad beat story, because honestly, like, I could have made top 8 of the battle hardened if I just like played correctly.
Mhm.
But it is it is like a pretty funny story. So I lose round 5 of the battle hardened. Round 6, I am just gonna pair up against somebody else and just like, I don't know, pray to the matchup, the tiebreaker gods. Maybe I can sneak in, right? I get paired up against this guy who I recognize, but I don't recognize him because he's from my pod. I recognize him because we register each other's decks. And then me and him both do a double take. I'm like, wait, you're not in my pod. He's like, no, I'm not. And we asked the judge, and we're like, is this correct? And the judge's like, yep, that's correct. Somebody from your pod dropped, and his whole pod dropped. And that's why Gem is pairing you guys.
Yeah, didn't he like get
Boy.
2 buys in a row or something because his opponents just weren't there?
Yeah, so his story is also pretty funny. He 3-0'd, oh man, I'm blanking on his name right now. He was wearing like all these like Sneep. He's on a team. It's called Sneep. Like Snap Keep, and there's like a snapping turtle with a little like castle keep on it. It's pretty cool. He gave me
Oh,
some
nice. I haven't seen
stickers.
that. I like that.
Yeah, he gave me some stickers. Um, so he he won his first pod 3-0'd. Then I think when they posted the second pods, he's like, wait, my name's not on here. And apparently they dropped him from the event for whatever reason. And he's like, I don't want to drop him 3-0. And they're like, oh, okay, sure. We can't do anything other than put you into the filler pod. So they put him in like the last pod of players, and he's in like a 5-person draft pod. And probably everybody who's in this 5-person draft pod doesn't feel like too great about the event. So I think 2 or 3 people, I think 2 people from that pod dropped like immediately after the draft. And then he paired up against somebody who dropped, so he got a bye. And then because there was 2 people who dropped without like saying anything, one of those people got a win. And so he paired up against the person who got a win and actually left, so he got another bye.
This is so cursed.
And
What a ride. Not for him.
And then the next round he gets paired up against me, who registered his deck.
Oh my god.
And we were both playing Icelander, but obviously he's
So you have both seen every card in each other's thing.
Yeah. And obviously, like, he's drafting in like a 5-person pod. His deck isn't going to be as good as mine.
That could mean his deck's even better than yours, right? Because he's potentially getting everything.
Yeah, but usually like the pool of cards is less, so you have like less overall power level. So it's think about it this way: like, if you're in a 2 Icelander pod with like 8 people,
packs going around, but theoretically you could be like you're in a pod with 3 to 4 5s, and you're one of those 3 to 4.
Yeah,
and he's the one of his hero in his pod, because that's really easy to be when it's 5 people.
But like, especially like if you're drafting Icelander, I think for Fi, it like if you're in a 5-person pod and you draft Fi and you're like the only Fi, I think your deck is probably gonna be as good or better than somebody from an 8-person pod. But if you're in like a 5-person draft, like, dude, a lot of the packs for Icelander are just like straight up terrible. It's like your pack is like a red Brain Freeze and a yellow Read the Ripples. His deck that I registered for him had 6 copies of Read the Ripples, and I don't really blame him after hearing that he was in a 5-person pod. It's just like, what are you gonna do? Like, when I first started registering, I was like, oh yeah, like this deck is pretty good, and then I started going, oh, there's 2 red Read the Ripples, 2 yellow Read the Ripples, 2 blue Read the Ripples, and it's just like, I mean, there's no cards to pick from, you know.
You made top 8 then, right?
Yeah, he made top 8.
That's so funny.
And I mean, like, I don't consider it a bad beat start because, you know, I lost round 5.
But to clarify, you won that game against him.
Yeah, I won that game.
You beat him,
yep.
And then he made top 8 instead after he went bye lost.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good beat story for him.
Yeah, he had the best beats.
Free tendies.
Yeah, I don't consider it a bad beat story because round 5 I lost to J-Mags, and I kind of freaked out a little bit after the game. Not in like a bad way. I was just like really upset because I basically had the win, but I just like, my brain exploded and I just like made the wrong play.
How that feels.
Yeah, I just made the wrong play.
Just, like, mad at yourself.
Yeah.
Those events are long, man. I had nothing left at the end.
Same.
So yeah, that's my funny story.
I got one funny story.
Yeah.
So I'm in the calling, and I'm paired up against Joshua Lau on Dory, and we get to the end of the game, and he comes in with this like massive Dawnblade round where he's like, Steelblade Supremacy, go again on Dawnblade, come in for 1,000,000 damage. And I'm like, okay, I agree. You get my whole hand. You did it. Block with everything. And I have a card left in hand and a card set. And he pumps over with an attack reaction from hand to make it hit. So then I play the card from my hand, and it's a Sink Below, fully blocked. He still has 1 card left in hand, and he tanks for like way too long. And I if it weren't for how much time we had on the clock, and it was like, this is clearly a big turn of the game, I probably would have been like, yo, slow play. But I could see that this decision mattered. And after like 3 or 4 minutes, he finally says something. He's like, I think this is my only line. I think this is the only way to win if I get that. And then I'm like, oh, you got a shimmering steel blade. What's the tutor? Whatever the super
Singing Steel Blade, I think.
Singing steel blade. Thank you. And we kind of talk out loud about the line because it was pretty face up that he had it.
Yeah.
And was like, is there any out at this point? And we're both just talking about like what his lines could be here because we're both just enjoying the game. It's not about win or lose. It's like, let's just enjoy the best game we can. And he's like, okay, I think this is my only out. And but it was a one card in his deck out. He needed to play that to tutor for, is it Glint the Quicksilver, the one that reprised draw card?
Yeah.
And then, oh no, yeah, he had to go for that because he didn't play a go again. So he needed to play that to get the go again, to then draw a card off the top, and it had to be the only twinning left in the deck. And it was like 30 cards left in deck or something. It was a 1 of 1 out. And he's shuffling, gives it to me to cut. And I asked him, you want me to give the top of the deck a wet kiss for good luck? And he's like, no. We'll just roll a d6 afterwards and put that many cards on the bottom. I go, no. Wet kiss or nothing. The man hands me a water bottle. I wet my lips, pull the mask down, give it a nice little... And then we flip over the top of the deck together, and it's the one of twinning. We have a massive crowd around us. Everyone goes crazy. Whoa! Like 3 or 4 judges come over, and they're like, what is going on? And they all yell at us, yo, be quiet. There's games going on around you. And we were going nuts. Oh my God, it's the one of out. That's great. Your decision didn't matter. I have another sink below in Arsenal.
Oh, I love that. That's so good. Oh my God.
I will block out the next on blade swing. And he was like, no! And we fist bump and then talk about the game for a bunch after that.
How do you sink below his other Dawn? His Dawn blade is swinging for 7.
Sorry, it was one what's it called? One of the draw 2. So it was 5, and I had 1 point of armor. So it must have been a different a pump in there, not double supremacy. But it was a big round. And the look in his face, oh, so great. I gave him hope just to suck the entire soul out of him.
Hey, you're a bad person.
That's so good.
Oh my God.
I have 2 really quick ones.
Yeah.
Ooh, go.
One was a funny story for everyone, I think. During deck registration for draft, the first draft, the judges gave us 5 minutes to write down everybody's cards. So after 5 minutes, the judge is like, please raise your hand and call the judge if you're not done registering. And at the same time, the entire room yells, judge.
That was so funny.
Such a fun moment to be a part of. Like, that's not enough time.
And
I was actually done, but like,
laughed.
yes, you need at least like 10. The second one was before my quarterfinal match with Brody. We were just hanging out because we're teammates, just chatting about, I don't know, everything. But like the whole weekend, I was doing a really good job of like mentally resting between rounds, but then like 5-10 minutes before, just getting into the state of like hyper focused. Like I was really good at like getting in the zone on demand, which was something new for me. I'm gonna hopefully keep triggering that in the future. But so I told Brody like, hey, in like a minute or 2, I'm gonna get up and try to forget we're friends for the next 40 minutes so I can focus up. And right after I say that, I check my phone and there's a Facebook notification and it says birthdays today, Brody Spurlock. I'm like, what? Like, dude, is it your birthday? Immediately broke all of my focus that I was starting and I had to like start over. I was like, oh my God, I gotta
unfriend him.
Play my teammate on his birthday in the quarters. Like,
unfriend him, have him back later.
Destroy him.
Yeah, I told the commentators though. I'm glad they mentioned it on stream.
That's funny.
Yeah.
All right.
Brody's insane. That kid is gonna be.
Oh my God, yeah.
I am afraid to see what he's going to look like years from now as a player. Like, he's this good already, and that kid is so smart. He's gonna be one of the best players in the world at some point soon.
Yeah, if not, he'll be.
I wouldn't be surprised if he wins Worlds.
If not, he'll be one of the best orchestral conductors
Is that a thing he does?
When he's tanking. Have you ever seen him tank?
Oh
No, I
no.
haven't played with him in person before. I've
Oh,
only
that's
played with him on
funny.
Talishar.
Yeah, he's like
I
conducting
understand.
he's conducting a symphony. Well, we'll take a video next time.
Yeah, yeah.
I need to see this.
All right. We're nearing the 50-minute mark. Do you guys have anything, any projects that you wanna push? I should have said this at the beginning of the podcast. We're on Rate This Podcast. I actually read some pretty nice reviews that people have left for us on Apple Podcasts. Maybe we'll read them out at the beginning of the next episode.
Well, I'm actually about to start streaming. I'm gonna be figuring that out later this week. So if you guys want to check me out on YouTube, it's just Pheano Black. I'm gonna be doing some like Talishar streaming, like I don't know, maybe 2 times a week, just messing around with decks and just hanging out with chat and stuff. I figured that'd be fun. I've been watching other people streaming on Talishar, and it seems like it's been a pretty active community on there, just people hanging out and having a good time, and it looked like fun. I figured I'd give it a shot myself. So if you guys want to check me out, go subscribe.
And do you have any things you want to promote?
Yeah, I mean, nothing personal right now. You can find me on Twitter at my name or Disc Golf Dan, but at Nationals, Yuanji had announced our little team we were working on. Yuanji, myself, Brody Spurlock, and Shane Martin. We don't have a name yet. I think we're sticking to us for a little while as we grow as a team, but you can look out for a team name announcement once we have one, and we'll be putting out some content as well. I think first we'll be putting out a in-depth deck tech about the Finalist. I think we're hoping to go into quite some detail about like different play lines and game plan versus all the decks, but I'd say, yeah, keep your eyes out for that.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Dan, so much for joining us.
Yep, thank you
And
guys.
Congratulations again.
yep,
Yeah, thank
congratulations
you,
on the
thank you.
finish.
Appreciate it.